Welcome to Fatima Today, the program started by Father Nicholas Gruner that we have the privilege of continuing. Today in our studios we have with us Mr. Christopher Ferrara, well-known author, writer, apologist for the faith, and we're talking about the upcoming Synod on the Family that's going to take place at the Vatican in October. Now, you would think that a synod of all the world's bishops coming together, there would be a sense of realistic hope amongst the faithful.
Laughing.
Realistic hope amongst the faithful that these men are really going to grapple with the main issues of the day that are destructive to the faith and offer real solutions and stand up to the world. But you said you're already laughing, so tell us why.
Well, yeah, I hate to be a cynic, but as soon as
it's cynic and there's realism. So.
No, yeah, but realism requires it. And when I heard the words synod on the family, I said, well, that's it for the family. They're coming for the family now. They've wrecked the liturgy. They've wrecked the church's mission to the world, converting it from an evangelizing force, a social force for the conversion of humanity, into a dialoguer, mired in ecumenism and interreligious dialogue and all sorts of other nonsense that has nothing to do with the divine commission. Now they want to address issues pertaining to the family. And then the other thing is, when they speak of problems, and by they I mean the modernists that infest the hierarchy today, when they speak of problems, they mean a doctrine that they would like to undermine, if not do away with.
Yeah, I think problems, we could say, it's kind of code words for doctrines I don't like.
Yeah, exactly.
That I want to kind of repackage, rebend, stretch and refit onto in accord with the modern zeitgeist.
That's why I've come to calling this whole process the Synod of Doom. I mean, we're in a situation where we're being asked to pray for the Synod. Pray for what? I mean, is the Synod a threat to the Church that has to be averted through prayer and perhaps even fasting? We should take comfort in the fact that bishops are gathering to discuss matters of importance. We should, but we know from experience over the past 50 years that the hierarchy is now infested by neo-modernism. Monsignor Pozzo said that in his famous address in 2010, that the spirit of Vatican II has given rise to a para-conciliar ideology that pervades, again, modernism in the Church. This is the secretary of the Ecclesia Dei Commission, who remains such even under Pope Francis.
Now let's take a look at this word modernism, because modernism, I think you can expand it more. But modernism can kind of be boiled down to this belief that the Catholic faith, religion, can change over the course of history. That Monsignor Fenton said it this way. He says that there can be some transformation of the dogmatic message of the Church over the course of the centuries.
Yeah, it's an all-embracing heresy, and Pius X in his monumental encyclical on modernism, Pascendi, in the original Italian, called it la fognatura, the sewer of all heresies. In the English translations, it's the synthesis of all heresies. Yeah. It's the place where all of the heresies, as if in a sewer, come together to form this poisonous stream. So it's the heresy of heresies. Basically what it does is it tries to corrupt everything it touches, whether it's the practice of the Church or the doctrine of the Church. And it does so very cleverly by affirming what it denies and denying what it affirms. And we see that in the Synod. Oh, no, we're not going to touch the doctrine on marriage. No, the doctrine must remain untouched. But in practice, we will ignore the doctrine. We will apply it in such a way that the doctrine no longer operates. That's how the modernist works. He affirms the very thing he's denying, and then he denies the very thing that he's affirming. So he denies that he's changing doctrine, but by practice he is changing doctrine. Because if the practice of the Church contradicts what she teaches, guess what? Doctrine has actually been changed.
Yes, because I mean, I give the example that suppose I gave a talk on the indissolubility and the grace of marriage, and I give this beautiful talk based on the Council of Trent. Everything is doctrinally absolutely perfect, magnificent precision. At the whole time I'm giving this talk, I have sitting on my lap a 24-year-old girl, gorgeous girl, who's not my wife. Now, if someone steps off stage and says, "Well," I step off stage and they say, "Mr. Ferrara, that was scandalous," and I say, "Well, I kept the doctrine."
Well, this is what's
but
involved.
My practice is completely at war with, and this is what's going on with these proposals at the incoming synod, I think.
I believe it was Cardinal Sarah who referred to this attempt to create a disjunction between doctrine and its application as a schizophrenic pathology.
Exactly.
And a heresy.
Heresy and a schizophrenic.
And by the way, speaking of Cardinal Sarah, one of the most eminent African prelates, I always think of Pius XII's prophecy when he was still Monsignor Pacelli, serving as Vatican Secretary of State in 1931 during a famous conversation recorded by Count Galeazzi in the biography of Monsignor Roche, that the third world, the so-called underdeveloped world, would save the Church. That was a remarkable thing for him to say in 1931.
Yes. Yeah.
Now it seems that the African hierarchy, which has its own problems, obviously, at least on matters of morality, is holding the line. And Cardinal Sarah said that we will absolutely resist any attempt to rebel against the teaching of Christ, meaning the Church of Africa.
Yeah, by we, he's talking as a representative for all the bishops.
That's right. So we see that prophecy perhaps coming into play. But it's a pathological schizophrenia and a form of heresy to deny and practice what one affirms verbally as doctrine. And that's what's going on in the Synod. And
that's what goes on in modernism. Pius X went even further than doctrine, as it were. He said they pervert the eternal concept of truth.
Of course,
this idea that truth can change over time. So anything that's connected to truth, doctrine, morals, that's going to be in progression and movement as well.
Well, when we say that the synod process is creating this situation, we don't mean to say that all of the participants are guilty of it. The problem with gatherings like this, and this is a novelty invented by Paul VI, is that it submits matters of doctrine and practice related to doctrine to a democratic assembly that votes. And when you set up a gathering of this sort in Rome, you're inviting disaster. Because what's going to happen is you may have a majority that's more or less orthodox, but the insurgents come in and they create trouble and they try to overthrow the gathering and turn it to their own purposes, which is exactly what happened at the Second Vatican Council. The Rhine group of theologians basically hijacked the council on its third day, October 13, 1962,
yes.
when Cardinal Lienert famously grabbed the microphone and said, "We want to elect our own drafting committees." And John XXIII was cowed into submission. And as a result, all of the preparation of the council, which was more or less traditional,
2 years of preparation,
thrown in the garbage, and the documents that plague us to this day were replaced and voted on instead. And this is what we see at the Synod. The insurgents see an opening. Casper and the Rhine group are back again, attempting to use the Synod to subvert in practice what they will piously affirm in principle.
Now, what are we talking about specifically? What are the one or two or three the main dangers? Well, first of all, a number of people have noticed that the I think it's the lineamenta, whatever. There are certain things that are not mentioned, such as contraception,
right,
and things like that. So that's what we were saying earlier, that these real problems of the day that threaten the family, that threaten the eternal salvation of souls, are just not talked about when they claim that what we're doing now is looking at the signs of the times.
Well, what are the issues today confronting the family? The emergence of a divorce culture. The divorce rate is skyrocketing, even among Catholics. It's commonly believed to be 50%, but it isn't as high among Catholics as it is among Protestants and unbelievers of various kinds. Still, it's alarmingly high, something like 30 to 40%, depending on where you look. So that's problem number one, the emergence of a divorce culture. And that stems, in turn, from the contraceptive culture. If you decouple marriage from the idea of procreation, and you turn marriage, conceptually speaking, into a living arrangement between two spouses who may or may not want children. It depends upon whether they're going to use the contraceptive methods that month. And if it doesn't work out, well, then you get a divorce, and that's the prevailing culture, contraception and divorce. The other problem is abortion. Abortion is on the march throughout the Western world, and throughout most of the world, in fact. And Catholics now view abortion, at least in certain cases, as favorably as liberalized Protestants, and even as favorably as complete non-believers. And then the last problem that should be confronted by the Synod is the march of militant homosexualism. The gay rights movement, the pro-sodomy movement is really what it is. And these are the issues that threaten the family. And what do we see at the Synod? Well, we predicted this, as I said a few moments ago. The minute I heard the words Synod on the Family, I knew this would devolve into an attack on the family. The insurgents would come in and they would promote the very problems that the church should be addressing. They would promote the idea that there can be something like divorce among Catholics. They would remain silent on contraception or suggest that it be treated leniently in the confessional. They would countenance the idea that divorced and remarried people could somehow be readmitted to the church in terms of sacramental life. They can, of course, attend Mass right now. They're not excommunicated, through some kind of strange penitential process that would allow them to continue living in adultery even though they've remarried civilly and left behind the spouse to whom they were indissolubly wed. So the Synod on the Family has turned out to be a battle between those who defend the traditional conceptions of the family and those who seek to undermine those traditional conceptions. And then that's really what the Synod is all about. It's a pitched battle to defend what little we have left.
And there's also there's a very strong sense of compromising with the world.
Of course.
And kind of letting the world itself dictate what the principles of the church are going to be.
Sure. Cardinal Casper, who has become known as the Pope's theologian, speaks of a chasm between Christian teaching on marriage and procreation and the real lives of ordinary Christians. What he's talking about, and when he refers to this chasm, is what John Paul II called silent apostasy. So this chasm, which is really apostasy, is something that Casper and the termites who infest gatherings like the Synod wish to accommodate the church to. They want the church to welcome apostasy into her midst and institutionalize it by allowing people who have essentially apostatized by remarrying civilly and living in adultery sit in the pew and receive the sacraments and go to confession without renouncing their adulterous unions. This would mean the destruction of the moral edifice of the church.
Well, in the working document that's happening now for the upcoming synod, they don't quite say that as explicitly as this. They say that these ideas have to be rethought. That's pretty much the terminology they use, correct?
Yeah, well, we cut to the chase on a show like this.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying...
They want to destroy the moral edifice of the church.
Yeah.
Let's be clear about that. Cardinal Casper and his cronies wish to destroy the moral edifice of the church. They may not subjectively think that's what they're doing, but if you were to say to divorced and remarried people that you can enter a confessional whenever you wish, receive absolution, and then go and receive Holy Communion, while remaining in an adulterous union and continuing to engage in adulterous relations, if that can be permitted, then what is left of the concept of mortal sin in the church?
Well, why should that sin be exempt from any other sin? Because as I hope the viewers know, when you go to confession, you're supposed to have true sorrow and a firm purpose of amendment, which means while you're in the confessional and you mean it with all your heart, I am not going to commit this sin again, or I am going to avoid the circumstances that lead me into this sin. And I mean, I know we all know of cases where the priest would say to the divorced or remarried, you either have to live like brother and sister, or you have to separate.
Well, it's fascinating in a way, in a pathological sense, to see what's going on here, because the very teaching that they are attacking now, the impossibility, the doctrinal practice related to the teaching, the impossibility of admitting continuing public adulterers to the sacraments was defended ferociously by both John Paul II and Benedict XVI. After the Synod in 1981, I believe, John Paul II came out with his apostolic exhortation, Familiaris Consortio, and he said the Church affirms the traditional practice of not admitting to Holy Communion people who have civilly remarried, even though they were indissolubly married in the Church, because to do otherwise would throw the faithful into confusion and would be inconsistent with the relationship between Christ and his Church, which is seen in the Blessed Sacrament. And after the Synod, I think it was in 2000, Benedict came out with his apostolic exhortation.
Benedict? 2000?
In 2005.
2005,
he came out,
okay.
After the Synod in 2000,
right.
He came out, I think it was called Caritatis Sacramentum,
okay. Mm-hmm.
reaffirming what John Paul II had taught on the same discipline, saying that the Church cannot admit civilly remarried people to Holy Communion and to the sacrament of confession unless they do what the Church has traditionally required. If you have to remain in this relationship because of children, you have to commit to ending the adulterous relations. You have to live as brother and sister. That may be difficult for you, but whoever said that the way of the cross is going to be easy? And yet, it is paradoxically easy if you pick up that cross and carry it. Our Lord said, My burden is easy, my yoke is light, but you have to carry it. And then when you carry it, you transcend your circumstances. When you're living life as you should, according to the teaching of the church, which seems difficult to an outside observer, you achieve the freedom of living according to gospel morality. That's where happiness lies, by the way.
Well, it's interesting, because Pope Pius XII made the same point. He talked about people who look at the church as binding. And he says, well, a thing could be binding where you're wrapped in chains and you can't move. That's one sort of binding. But the other sort of binding is the rope that the mountain climber is using to hold him on to the cliffs. And the stability of that binding gives him the freedom to move.
Of course. People
And
recognize this on a natural level. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago about his fitness regimen. Fitness regimen is a good thing, and I asked him why he does it. And he says, well, I've never eaten anything that tastes as good as being thin. So they recognize that there is a kind of liberation through discipline on the natural level. So they go to gyms and they pump iron and they make themselves physically fit because they achieve a certain freedom. It feels good to be physically fit, and you have to achieve that through a disciplined life. Why don't people see that when it comes to the moral life? That kind of discipline actually becomes easy over time. And the real problems that people have to suffer are the ones that they impose upon themselves by making a shambles of their own lives, by abandoning spouses, creating a situation in families where children hate their parents because of what was done to them, and then they go off and think that they can make themselves happy by marrying someone else, marrying in quotes. Mm-hmm. And this is the tragedy that the church has always sought to prevent by saying, even in these difficult cases, that if you find yourself in such a situation, because you have sinned, the only legitimate way out of it is to make the best of the situation while no longer partaking of the adulterous relationships that you thought were making you happy, but are actually the bondage of sin. That's a beautiful teaching and a liberating teaching. And now these, I have to use this vulgar word, these creepy characters convening in Rome, led by the likes of Cardinal Casper and that positively diabolical German church, which is a parasite on the German body politic, sustained by tax dollars, they're trying to destroy it all in the guise of defending the indissolubility of marriage. It's a complete mockery.
Well, I think, too, here we come to the crux of the problem. I think maybe what we should do for the viewer is rebuild a little bit from February consistory, Casper's speech, where he proposes this. Now, this is prior to either one of the synods. He proposes this notion that we could work out some sort of new penitential practice where divorced, remarried after a certain period of penance will be readmitted to Holy Communion while continue living in that state. But if Casper had said that, that would be one thing. What happened the next day was really what threw everybody, the entire church, into turmoil, and that was Pope Francis coming out and publicly endorsing this statement, and by saying, pointing out Cardinal Casper in front of all the cardinals, thanking him for his serene theology, saying, this is what I call doing theology on your knees. And this is when I think most of us realize that we're in for real trouble in the future.
Well, let's be completely frank about this and get to the heart of the matter. The Synod was conceived, set in motion, and propelled toward what Francis hoped would be the result he desired by none other than Francis himself. And let's make no mistake about it. The idea of admitting divorced and civilly remarried people to Holy Communion is an idea that appeals to Francis, and which Francis himself implemented as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Sandro Magister, in one of his articles, pointed out that when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he sent the priests into the favelas, the slums, the so-called peripheries, to administer Holy Communion to all and sundry.
Everyone, yes.
And most of those people were living in adulterous relationships of one kind or another, either in second marriages or out of wedlock entirely. He didn't care. He wanted everyone to receive Holy Communion. Let's also remember that Francis telephoned the woman in Argentina and told her personally by telephone to ignore the advice of her parish priest and go receive Holy Communion elsewhere, even though she had married a divorced and remarried man. And when she said to him that her priest in the local parish had declined to allow her to receive the Holy Sacrament, the Blessed Sacrament, in that situation, he replied, well, some priests are more papist than the Pope. None of that is denied by the Vatican. Mm-hmm. And then let's not forget that on another occasion, his personal friend, a Mr. Crespo, came to visit him in the Vatican and said that there was this other woman, this poor woman in Argentina, who was living out of wedlock after having divorced her husband and now wished to confess and receive Holy Communion, well, living out of wedlock with another man. And the Pope said to Crespo, go and tell her that the Pope said she's free to receive Holy Communion. That's the second personal papal dispensation given to a woman.
And it's not even a true dispensation.
Yeah, reported in the press, not denied by Francis or even by the Vatican press office. So this is what Francis wants to do. There's no question about that. Whether he thinks he can get away with it, whether he retreats from the idea later on is another matter. That he is in favor of it is beyond question.
Yes, well, and this is why we see something that I know I've never seen it before in my lifetime, where we have cardinals and bishops standing up and defending the traditional teaching, defending traditional morals, defending traditional discipline, and asking, pleading, encouraging the faithful, stand up and fight. And
absolutely.
You know, we've never seen this before. We have the 5 cardinals who wrote the book, Remaining in the Truth of Christ, that was dead aimed at this problem. This little booklet here, The Preferential Options for the Family, 3 bishops here, Bishop Pagano, Bishop Vaza, and Bishop
what's
Athanasius.
that title?
Preferential Option for the Family.
That's a direct attack on Francis' position.
Yeah, because he's always talking about the preferential
That's
option.
an ironic title. I didn't even know there was such a book in existence.
100 questions and answers, and they are ruthless. They don't mention Francis. They mention Casper. But they are fighting what they fear is going to be a real knockdown, drag-out battle in the synod for the wrong cause, to bring towards this blessing of sacrilege.
Well, this is how the Holy Ghost works in the church. And we sit here and offer criticisms of the status quo, and these criticisms should be offered. We should be angry about what's going on. But we're not doing it so that people become bitter and give up hope in the church. The Holy Ghost will bring good out of this situation. Now we see it at the synod. These cardinals who have gone along with the post-conciliar revolution for the most part, even those who are sympathetic to tradition, now see the yawning abyss, only a few feet ahead. And Cardinal Pell said, no, we're not going out of business, he said. We're not going to let the church be put out of business by this synod. So now they see that if we give up on even these basic moral questions, we are finished as an institution that has any claim to divine guidance. We can't let this happen. Now God is drawing good out of this situation and forcing some of these people to develop some backbone, some of these clerics.
And some of the arguments they develop are really fine.
Cardinal Mueller's statement in defense of marriage, his letter from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, what was it, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, in defense of the traditional discipline of the church, was absolutely magnificent. You know, you and I are used to combing through Vatican documents to see what's wrong with it. There was nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with this. It was a classic Catholic statement of the simple truth about holy matrimony, the kind of thing we were used to seeing for 1,962 years until the Second Vatican disaster. Suddenly they've rediscovered the clarity of teaching that characterizes the pre-Vatican II magisterium. So in a way, God is drawing good out of this.
And what is interesting too is all the men, if you want to consider this, all the cardinals, the bishops who were standing up against this, none of them are standing up against it with their own theology. None of them are saying, well, we have a new problem in the church here with the synod, so we have to come up with a new solution. Every one of them are taking us back to what the church always taught. This here has a number of quotations from the Council of Trent, from Leo XIII, from Pius XII. I mean, they quote John Paul and Benedict II, but there is only one answer, and that is returning to the true faith.
I can't get over the title, The Preferential
Isn't it wonderful?
Options
That's
of
why
the
I got
Family.
it. That's why I got it.
Very clever, ironic title.
Yeah.
And that's a very good sign. When was that published?
It just came out.
Oh, I better get myself a
It
copy
just came out,
and start
yeah.
pouring through it. Again, this is where the Holy Ghost draws good out of evil. Now these prelates, many of them are waking up and saying this process, this aggiornamento, updating of the church, has gone too far. Now they're coming for morality. We're going to draw a line in the sand and defend morality. Now the first synod averted disaster when that revolting midterm report, which called precisely for this opening to the divorced and remarried, and the valuing of the homosexual orientation, and the recognition of the precious support provided by homosexual unions, was rejected by the Council Fathers. But maybe in another show we can talk about how for Synod number 2 in 2015, they're still at it.
Oh, they're
They
still
are
at
not
it.
giving up.
Yeah, because we are running out of time on this program, and what we can close with, though, I think, is some considerations about the fact that this is, what's happening with the Synod is a movement of modernism. And what did Pius X call modernism? A synthesis, a grand sewer of all heresies. And what I'm reminded of every time I hear that term, synthesis of all heresies, is one of the most glorious titles of our Blessed Mother, which is the conqueror of all heresies. And Monsignor Fenton, writing about this, would say that this saint, like St. Thomas, was mostly against the Albigensians, and this saint against the Protestants, but it's been given to Our Lady to conquer all heresies, and she's always had that title. And in a way, this is a prophetic title given for her that tells us about her ultimate conquering of modernism, the synthesis of all heresies.
Well, I think we can count on her intercession at the critical moment. The question is whether we've reached that moment yet, or whether there are more horror shows to come. And only time will tell, I think.
So we have a lot more to say about the Synod. We have a lot more to say about numerous things going on in the Church. We're glad you're with us today. And so please stay tuned for the next program, where we will talk more about the Synod. We're going to talk a little bit about the Ecology encyclical, if we can call it an encyclical, and a number of other points going on. So stay with us. Thank you.